Welcome to the K-State Regen Ag Pod, where we talk all things regenerative agriculture here at Kansas State University, across the state of Kansas and beyond. I'm Nick Detter, your host, and today I'm joined by Dr. Dorivar Ruiz Diaz, Professor of Soil Fertility and Nutrient Management, and the interim department head for the Kansas State University Department of Agronomy. Dorivar, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
So just to start off, the first question we ask all of our guests is to introduce yourself, give us a little bit of your background, and tell us about your current position here at K-State.
Yes, Nick, it's great to be here, part of this podcast. My background is in, as you already mentioned, in soil fertility and nutrient management. I've been working here at K-State Department of Agronomy, focusing primarily on applied soil fertility. My program is very field-oriented, so we really look to for answers to questions, practical questions from farmers. I have my primary responsibility is extension and research. So really my research program tried to provide answers to questions to farmers and again, feeding and supporting that extension program across the state.
So you mentioned that your background is in fertility, soil fertility and nutrient management. So how do these regenerative agriculture practices and these principles of regenerative agriculture, how do they impact soil fertility and nutrient management?
Yes, that's an excellent question. And when I think about regenerative agriculture, I really think about essentially regenerating the conditions back to original conditions, especially when it comes to soil. And I'm looking specifically soils in this case. So we want to get back to what was that original fertility in that particular field, that particular soil. But I think in many ways, we also have the opportunity to even get even better conditions than what we had before. And so I think that's really the opportunity we have now as we implement some of these regenerative practices in our farming systems. Specifically thinking about soil fertility, I think if anything, I would say this is probably the area where we may see the most impact. We have to think a little bit more about fertility, not just from the chemical characteristics standpoint. Simply, oftentimes when we think about soil fertility, you think about soil test information, and you're looking at the parts per millions of nutrients, and that seems to be a lot of the chemistry side of things. What percent of the nutrients are maybe in inorganic form, organic form, that sort of things. And so yes, that's one aspect, right? The chemical component. But really, we need to look at other key components also that is affecting availability of those nutrients, because it doesn't really mean much if you have, say, very high part per million levels of phosphorus or potassium. If that nutrient is not available, the plants cannot access that nutrient. So that's where we start to look at other aspects, things like the physical properties, right? Root development is going to be a key aspect of that. And of course, as we're implementing different components of regenerative ag, we're going to improve the physical properties of the soil, which is going to, in turn, increase water infiltration, water holding, and root development. And suddenly now we can actually have the root accessing some of that nutrient that maybe the soil test is telling us that's there. Of course, there's another key component, which is the biological aspect of this. We're thinking about nutrients like nitrogen or sulfur. All of these nutrients are being driven by biological processes. Again, the process of mineralization and nitrification, all of this is driven by those biological processes. When we talk about increasing nutrient use efficiency, again, what's happening in terms of that biology is going to be a key component. How much of the nutrients are maybe released back to and available to the crops. And again, as I mentioned already, the physical aspect, which is, again, the root development, having enough moisture there to allow for root development and accessing the nutrients. So it's a lot more than just the soil test, and this is one thing that maybe sometimes we think about soil fertility and you think about soil tests and the parts per million, and it's really, that's just one aspect. It's a lot more to it. And that's where, again, thinking about the holistic components of regenerative agriculture and how that's affecting soil fertility is really the way to think about it. And that put us in a situation, people like me really need to work with different colleagues, different expertise. It's not really just the chemists or the physical aspects, but all different aspects of soils, but also crop production, um, soil biology, and so on. So again, there's a lot that is affecting that soil fertility. So anyways, I think it's a little bit more than maybe thinking about just one topic itself, but that's really what it takes for those nutrients to become available, and that's what we're looking at when we think about soil fertility in general.
So you're saying that as farmers potentially adopt some of these regenerative agriculture practices, the improvements in the soil structure allow the nutrients to be more available and to cycle better. Is that kind of what you're suggesting?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's what we want, right? And then I see this very often actually working with farmers that, I get a nutrient deficiency that show up in maybe corn crop, and tissue analysis is telling us that there's maybe a deficiency in potassium, for example. And then we do soil tests, and again, the parts per million come back and says, well, there's plenty of K there.
Hmm.
So what's going on? And then we start to go to the field, we look at the field, and we realize that there's compaction issues. There's water is not moving through the soil, and obviously it doesn't matter if we have plenty of nutrients there. If the conditions of that particular field is not conducive to good development and growth. So again, this tie back immediately to return to investment to fertilizer, for example, efficiency, right? We can do better with less fertilizer if we are able to put more of that fertilizer into the plant rather than maybe sitting there only, not being available. In some cases, maybe runoff losses, in some cases, maybe leaching losses that we are not using for crop growth and yield ultimately. And so again, all of this is connected back to that efficiency, and again, being able to do more with basically less input, which again, all of this is connected to different aspects of the chemical, biological, and physical aspects of soils.
Well, that sounds very promising. I mean, I'm sure every farmer wants to know how they can use less fertilizer but get similar yields. So could you talk a little bit about how some of your research has shown how some specific practices have improved soils and worked in such a way as you're describing as addressing those issues in the soils that make the nutrients more available or cycle better?
Yes, and there are many aspects there, right? We were talking about, and here's where really different concepts of regenerative ag is really comes into play. It's really not one single recipe that we're talking about here, and this is something we need to think a little bit differently. There's really those practices may be different depending on where you are. For example, one example could be the use of cover crops that are cycling back nutrients, and that can be very helpful. For example, in situations where we do have problems with leaching during certain times of the year, where using cover crops may be able to capture those nutrients and cycle back and leave it available for the next crop. And so that's one example where we can use that a cover crop to cycle back nutrients. But again, that is not maybe the recipe that we're going to follow in every environment, right? Every environment is going to need something different. In other cases, maybe we're using different types of cover crops to increase water infiltration, where we need more water infiltration to drive some of this biology that I just mentioned. We do need to have cycling of nitrogen or sulfur, that decomposition of organic matter and releasing nutrients. For that, you need to have water, right? And so we do have to need to have that movement of water. So we've seen some of this already, some of our work. We have one project recently where we have a combination of phosphorus management with and without cover crops, and this is really a situation where we're basically putting fertilizer at the same time when we're putting cover crops, and we're already seeing some of these differences. And of course, there are many. Sometimes it's not very easy to only focus on the effect of the nutrient here, because as the moment we start talking about cover crops, we already bring in other benefits, right? It's not just the nutrient cycling, but maybe what else is happening there, residue cover, and other benefits that we're getting from cover crops. So it's a little difficult to completely separate that and say specifically it's only nutrients, but certainly we are measuring that nutrients is definitely one of the components here.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit more of that on the phosphorus side? I think I understand how, like you're talking about with nitrogen leaching, a cover crop, like a rye cover crop would capture excess nitrogen after a corn plant and, keep it from leaching, keep it in the system, keep it cycling in the soil. But how about for our immobile nutrients like P and K? How would cover crops potentially be a benefit for the capture by the plants of those nutrients and improving the efficiency of those nutrients?
Yes, there are other potential benefits there. I mentioned earlier the case of potassium, for example. Potassium is something that we often see essentially availability being affected by basically compaction issues where the root systems simply are not exploring the volume of soil. Okay, so that's one simple factor there. In the case of phosphorus, we talk about accessing phosphorus. Remember, we do have plenty of phosphorus in the soil. It's really the available form that's not there. But again, partnership essentially, if you will, between the biology, mycorrhiza, for example, that is going to be thriving in some of those good soils, that's going to allow us to access more phosphorus that is already in the soil that otherwise maybe is not available to the crop. And so that's another example where we can see some increase in efficiency and increasing use of some of these nutrients. In the case of phosphorus, again, mycorrhiza is something that we know very well is allowing us to have more access to phosphorus. But again, to have those good activity going on there, we need to have a good soil environment that will allow us to have those levels of mycorrhiza activity and allow us to access more of that phosphorus. So that's one aspect. Something also that we don't maybe think about too much is, again, when we manage fields well, obviously we don't have things like runoff losses, right? And we don't think too much about these, but anytime we have runoff losses, we have some sediments that are leaving the field, we are leaving the best part in terms of nutrients. That's where all your phosphorus, that's where your potassium is going. And it's not in the right place, right? We need to keep that in place. We need to keep that in the field where the crops are going to use it and make yields. Otherwise, it's gone and potentially maybe contaminating surface water somewhere. And again, it's not benefiting us for sure.
You mentioned the right place, and that made me think about the 4 R's of nutrient management. You might have to remind me of those: right place, right time, right amount. What's the fourth one?
Right time, right place,
Listen.
right source, and right rate of fertilizer. And
Yes.
the 4R concept is one thing that we talk a lot about in nutrient management. And all of this, again, it needs to be in the context of management as well, right? And the 4Rs, I mentioned earlier that we don't really have a recipe necessarily for regenerative ag practices. We need to be adapting to the environment and really putting the right practice where we need. The 4Rs are a little bit that way too, right? I mean, what is the right placement? And that a lot of that will depend on things like what kind of tillage we have, right? And the right source of fertilizer. Well, the right source will be depending on many factors, right? Again, how are we putting that fertilizer? The economics is going to be a big part of this. Again, we need to be in soil fertility and talking about fertilizers. Economics is going to be a big component of this. We talk about the 4Rs. It has a lot of benefit agronomically, environmentally, and I think that help us also to keep improving our conditions, soil conditions in general. But first of all, and this is always something I talk to farmers is that, and I hear from them is that the economics needs to be there, and that's from the fertility management standpoint. Which again, as we're thinking about regenerative ag practices, we need to tie that back also to efficiency. Better use of resources, and how is this helping us in the long term?
So you mentioned the economics. Do you have much experience in any of your research on seeing how, some either whether these 4R principles of nutrient management or any of these regenerative agriculture practices can help the economic side of farmers as they make fertility decisions for their operation?
That is actually maybe one of the main projects that we have in recent years. We've been focusing primarily on nitrogen, and we look at different crops in corn, soybean, winter wheat, and really focusing in these different management options. And really is the 4 Rs what we're talking about here. Um, and look at the economics here. And this again goes back to what we've been talking already here extensively, which is the increase in efficiency, minimizing losses, maximizing uptake by crops, looking at not just the chemistry, but also the physical properties and the biology. And so, yes, we've been looking at that. We do have a project that we've been working on in recent years, and we try to put economics on this as well. And yes, we are seeing some clear benefits. And one of the things, especially a year like this, where input prices, fertilizer prices are high and grain prices are low, one of the common questions is, okay, do I need to cut back on fertilizer, and how much do I need to cut back? And yes, in many cases, especially things like phosphorus and potassium, we do have the opportunity to cut back on rates. It is something that we should be doing. But in some cases, for example, in the case of nitrogen, maybe we shouldn't be talking about necessarily cutting back, but the question is, how do we maximize the return to that pound of nitrogen that we're putting out there? Oftentimes that means, improving application methods, minimizing losses using maybe some sort of inhibitors in some cases, and again, working with the system in particular, the biology, and again, the characteristics of that particular soil. And so that's where I think we need to be focusing on. It's not necessarily, okay, how do we maybe significantly cut back, but okay, how we can do better, how we can harvest more with what we are putting already, which again, in many cases, that's where we have opportunities and significant economic opportunities in that case. But again, yes, we have to also recognize that in some cases we can just cut back, and that's fine. And that's where we need to be looking at soil test information and look at where we are and make that decision. A year like this is particularly a situation where we need to be looking at very closely at these numbers.
Yeah, you mentioned cutting back and options in fertility rates. I know that sometimes one of the more contentious claims of regenerative agriculture is if you adopt these practices, does it change the amount of fertilizer you have to apply? Do we have any research on that? Is there any work on how recommendations going forward will be shaped based on management? Or at this point, is it still, mostly the same recommendation across management practices from K-State's perspective?
Nick, this is an excellent question, and I'm really glad you asked this. I think because yes, I hear this oftentimes also that one of the first claim is, okay, should we be cutting back on inputs and I think in many cases long term, yes, there is the potential there. But we have to be really careful also not to be too quick in terms of immediately cutting back on say, for example, nitrogen, because remember some of these. For example, we're trying to build up organic matter over time, right?
Yes.
And so to build up organic matter, we also need nitrogen, we need sulfur, right? And so we're not going to be able to accomplish some of the goals if we are immediately just cutting back on nutrients, at least at the beginning. Now, in the medium and long term, yes, of course, we do have the potential to start to cut back, and that makes sense because if we have a bigger pool of organic nitrogen, for example, cycling in the soil, obviously more nitrogen will become available to the crop during the growing season, and so that's what we want to see. But it's going to take time to get there, and so I think we have to be careful there in terms of just being too quick in terms of cutting back. The promise of cutting back rates I think is there, but the timing is something that we have to be really careful about. Otherwise, we may end up in a worse situation in some cases. You also asked about what about recommendations and university recommendations, specifically from K-State. And this is something that we've been historically, universities in general basically have the same recommendation pretty much for everything, regardless of whether we're talking conventional tillage or no-till. At K-State, we've been changing that in recent years or more recent revision of the fertilizer recommendations already have adjustments for different management, fertilizer management. We talked just a minute ago about the 4 Rs. Now, if we are doing a better job in terms of managing and applying fertilizer, we do have efficiencies there, and that's reflected in our recommendations right now. The next step is really to look at those regenerative practices, and what about those farmers who are already way ahead of the curve, where they already build up their soils, and they are really in a situation where they can start to maybe benefit from some of those increase in availability of nutrients and so on. We also need to make adjustments, I think, at some point in terms of recommendations for that type of system. And I think we need to get there. There's still things to learn there, but I believe that we definitely have opportunities, and we do need to recognize that kind of systems in our recommendations.
So just to kind of condense down what you said, what you would suggest potentially to a producer is, at first, these practices take time to see the benefits, which I think everybody knows. And so you kind of want to see maybe the improvements in your soil organic carbon and your soil total nitrogen before you would even consider thinking about changing your rates. Is that how you would approach it?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's a key message. I completely agree. I'm just concerned when people are too quick.
Yes.
Started cutting back, and we obviously we're not going to realize the benefit if we do that.
Yes. Well, shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about your role as interim department head. First of all, congratulations. You've been in that role for about 4 or 5 months now. Is that correct?
Yes. I'm not near anymore.
So I want to hear. I think, getting your part of the unique part of that position and that opportunities, I'm sure you get a different look at the department than you have ever had before. And so my question is from that different perspective, from your role as interim department head, how do you think the department as a whole is thinking about regenerative agriculture? And what are some of the conversations you hear happening at more of a departmental level or even a College of Agriculture level when it comes to these questions of regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and and you're right. I mean, in this serving in this role for a few months now, but one thing that's been really eye-opening for me is that I'm able to see all the things that's happening in the department and at the college level. Even though I've been in this department for many years, I just learning that there's so many things that I didn't know that's happening. Great things that happen in the Department of Agronomy, and so regenerative ag in this context overall, I think is I see it pretty much everywhere. Wow. And this is one thing that is, to me, I wouldn't even expect this, but we also need to think a little bit about regenerative ag. This concept and the all the work that needs to go into regenerative ag is really require multidisciplinary teams, and I think that's the reason why I see this in so many aspects in what we do in agronomy, because our department of agronomy is highly interdisciplinary. We do have all kinds of work going on in different aspects of agronomy. And if you think about regenerative ag, we really need to be looking at all, I'm talking about soils from my perspective, but my colleagues working in crops and, climate and soil biology and so on. There's so many different disciplines going on, and we do need to have we need to have knowledge coming from all these different disciplines to make this concept of regenerative ag work. And again, going beyond the department, we just talked earlier about economics, and in the college level, ag econ, we need to make this work in a way that's going to be economical and profitable, which I think I think it is definitely possible, but we need to show that as well. And so anyways, one of the things that I've been doing in the last week or so is I've been going through achievement summary from colleagues across the department, and I get to see a lot of the type of work they are doing. And to your question, I see regenerative ag basically touching all the different aspects of the department and in the college for that matter as well. The College of Agriculture, we work a lot, we focus a lot here on the agronomy side, but I just mentioned ag econ, animal science, different departments, plant pathology, and so on that are basically key components in touching this concept of regenerative ag.
Yeah, it's very encouraging. I'm excited to see where it goes from there, and excited to see your leadership in that position because I think you definitely understand the value of it. So I think it's for everyone that out there that cares about regenerative agriculture, they should know that at least on that front, the department's in good hands with you. So.
Thank you, Nick.
Well, to wrap up, the last question we like to ask all of our guests is, what's something currently going on in your job, whether it's with your research or in your position as interim department head, that excites you?
Yes, there are many things, and this is a good question. And what are some of the things that excite me? One of the things that I would say that in more recent years, I would say my job in general that really is exciting to me, and I think is pretty much related to regenerative ag, is the trend that we have right now to work more with multidisciplinary teams. I start doing this, I would say, maybe a couple years ago, more of this. In the past, simply, you are the soil fertility person and you do the soil fertility stuff. But especially with some colleagues in the department, Chuck Rice, yourself, and others, we start to explore more of these. We form teams. And what's really exciting to me is that I feel like I'm learning a lot. I've been doing this for many years now, but there's a lot of things I'm learning. I'm able to lead a couple multi-state projects now with pretty heavy component on regenerative ag, but looking at working with different regions, different institutions, but most importantly, people that really, typically, you're not going to be able to work. Typically, you don't work in agronomy. And I have some colleagues working in engineering and biology. And it's really exciting to talk to, say, engineers that typically don't know much about agronomy and actually being able to teach them a few things, which feels good. And on the flip side, also, I learn a lot. And so to me, that's one of the most exciting things that happened in the last few years. From my program in particular, is this opportunity to be more active in across multidisciplinary teams, regional teams, and so on, just because of that opportunity to learn more and really tackle bigger issues. One thing that I'm learning here too is that I've been doing my work in soil fertility, and maybe it's good at a certain level, but if you want to tackle some of the bigger issues that we have right now, we're going to have to do this working more as a team.
And I thought that'd be my last question, but you sparked another thought. One of the things I've always really respected about you and your work, and you even have some background in extension, is I think you've always tried to make sure what you're doing is producer focused and has a real impact on producers and matters to them. So could you speak a little bit to how the shift and the growth and expansion into interdisciplinary research could be a benefit for producers?
Yes, absolutely. There's one example, I guess, one project that we're working on that I'm very excited about is it's a multi-state and again multidisciplinary project, which is actually also have the funding source require basically an industry partnership, and so that was great. I mean, one of the things key components here is that we also partnering with the industry. And we are ultimately what we want to do is to look at complex interactions that happen there in the field. Especially when you're thinking about regenerative ag and agronomy in general. The challenge is often that nothing happens in a vacuum, right?
Absolutely.
Everything there's interaction on everything, and that makes things very complex. Right? And now you're bringing things, you bring in different climate, different water regimes across gradients, and that makes things even more complicated. And so one of the things that I'm excited about this particular project is the partnership with industry. One of the things that you mentioned, obviously, I try to work on relevant topics for farmers from the extension side, but oftentimes farmers are working also with industry for the most part, not just extension. And so we have to partner with them and make sure that the information, the knowledge that we are generating is reaching out farmers through industry partners. And so that's one aspect that I really like about that. The other component of this is that we're working also not just, like I say, multidisciplinary teams, but we're working with, economists. We're working specifically. One aspect that I like is the modeling component, which is basically working with colleagues who are able to develop scenarios in the future that can guide farmers to make decisions. And so this means, given certain environments, certain conditions, what are the scenarios? And again, this is go directly to farmers for decision maker making, and again, hopefully in trying to do a better job in making decisions as we have some changes in environment and conditions moving forward.
Yeah, just like you said, agronomy is this series of interactions, and farmers are always having to deal with those interactions. So I think whatever we can do to make our research, match their reality more, I do think it's really going to have a big impact. So I'm excited with the direction that things are going. Well, Dorivar, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the K-State Regen Ag Pod, and we'll talk to you next time.
Oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day. Home, home on the range, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day.